Let me get into this case that has really been a mystery in terms of a global affair crisis. The president now said that he has dispatched his Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, to Saudi Arabia immediately to discuss what's been going on here. And it gets almost more bizarre by the second. Now, the allegation has been that the Saudi crown prince ordered the killing of this guy, Jamal Khashoggi. Now, he's a Saudi national who's been critical of the Saudi royal family. He's a Washington Post contributor, and he's a U.S. resident, but he's not a citizen. He entered the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, Turkey, October the 2nd. He hasn't been seen by anybody since that day. The Turkish government had suggested that Khashoggi was killed by a 15-member Saudi hit team who then dismembered his body and smuggled it out of the consulate in pieces to an unknown destination. But so far, the evidence supporting that up to today has been zero. Some reports claiming that Khashoggi's murder was recorded, but to date, no audio tape, no videotape. Not even the Turkish government, which is no great friend of America, is currently feuding with Saudi Arabia over other issues, saying it's absolutely sure Khashoggi was killed by anyone. They can't say it, let alone the Saudis. Now, this just began to break moments ago, and reports have now surfaced that Saudi Arabia is preparing a report in which, in fact, they will admit Jamal Khashoggi. This is the Washington Post columnist now. This is a very dangerous, we start seeing journalists killed. Went missing earlier this month, was killed by an interrogation gone wrong. When he entered, I guess, the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. All right, here to talk about it, we have Morgan Ortegas is with us, National Security Global Affairs Analyst, former U.S. Treasury attaché to Saudi Arabia, lived in Saudi Arabia 2 years. She, along with Dan Bongino, former Secret Service agent, author as well of the now best-selling book, Spygate. Thank you both for being with us. Morgan, you lived in Saudi Arabia 2 years. This just breaking. This has been a mystery up until like an hour ago. What do you think?
Right. Yeah, Sean, I lived there for most of 2010 and 11. I anticipated something like this breaking, and the reason I did is because when the president said this morning that he's sending Secretary Pompeo to Saudi Arabia, that means the Secretary of State, one of the busiest people in the world, certainly in the government, has canceled all of his plans to fly halfway around the world. I knew it was incredibly serious then, and that the Saudis we're going to be under tremendous pressure to come clean with whatever it is. So if the reports are to be believed, and we're still going to have to see if the reports out there is what comes out, is that the Saudis are claiming some sort of responsibility for this. It looks like they're going to claim that senior leadership was not involved, but that people in charge of it who ordered it would be held accountable. There's a lot to break down.
How is it they didn't know until now? Because how would they not know until now when it happened in their consulate in Istanbul?
That's a fantastic question, and I think the big takeaway that I have from this report, and we'll see what happens when Secretary Pompeo meets with them and what the readout is the Saudis not only need to come clean on this and satisfy President Trump and Secretary Pompeo, they also have an audience in the Congress, in the Senate, that they're also accountable to. Mind you, this massive arms deal is a memorandum of understanding. It has not been signed by the president. There's bipartisan consensus for sanctions. People like Rand Paul have actually been very vocally unsupportive of the relationship. I don't agree with Senator Paul for a number of reasons that I could go into of why I think the relationship is important, but the Saudis need to understand how serious this is. We need to know who's going to be held accountable, and I think that they're going to continue to see massive movement away from their big finance forum, which is just a few weeks. Secretary Mnuchin's supposed to be there. We saw the Dow sell off this afternoon as reports.
Well, they were threatening.
There's a lot at stake here.
Yeah, well, they were threatening, maybe even using the power of their oil if, in fact, if there was a price to pay or any retribution from the U.S. Dan Bongino, this is getting more bizarre by the minute. How does somebody, in this particular case, walk into the Saudi consulate in Istanbul and never get seen again?
Yeah, that's highly unlikely, Sean. There were really two aggravating factors here. One, you already brought up the fact that this happened in a consulate. A diplomatic facility that breaks every single protocol, moral, ethical rule imaginable. Secondly, Sean, aggravating as well. Aggravating is probably an enormous understatement here. Is that he was a member of the media? Not that this is ever permissible. Please, I'm not saying. I'm just suggesting that This makes this even worse on the scale of savagery. The fact that this individual, Khashoggi, was a member of the media makes it even worse. Now, how could it happen in a diplomatic facility like that without higher-ups somehow knowing? It's highly unlikely. But having said that, there's two sides of this. There's the side that said, wait back, let's see, let's get the facts. Looks like some of the facts are starting to come out now. But we do need the Saudis. This is not as simple as a black and white situation. We do need the Saudis. The relationship with the Israelis is starting to improve. We need them. We're on a razor's edge with the Iranians and their nuclear program. So this has to be viewed that way, and I do think Trump gets that. One more thing, though, Sean. I think the Saudis did screw up big time when they seemingly tried to make these veiled threats that they were going to respond.
Yeah.
This had to be responded to. You can't just let this go. So that was a bad move.
Yeah,
May I add something there too, Sean?
Yeah.
And just to say the thing that not only the threats that worried me what Dan just said, it seemingly the Saudis need to answer why they lied to the president on this. The president came out and said that the king and Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince, had called Jared Kushner, who's working on this peace deal. Unless there's something that we don't all know about, it looks like they have lied to the president. And I think that there's a lot of explaining to be done there.
Well, I think they're going to try and pass it on to an underling that was in the consulate in Istanbul and say, oh, we didn't know. But, I mean, I can't imagine for a second that they don't have cameras all over that consulate in Istanbul. You spent 2 years in Saudi Arabia. Year and a half, but I mean, the treatment of women, I have chronicled a lot on this program, and life under Sharia, and women voting and driving, etc., and being told how to dress, being told that granted permission if they can travel abroad, etc. I'm sure you had to cover up if you went out in public anywhere. What was life like for you as a woman living under Sharia there?
This is such an excellent point that you're bringing up, Sean, and the reason is that what we actually saw in the last year was a modernization in Saudi. We saw women being able to drive. We saw the garment that I had to wear is called the abaya, that you wear. It sort of looks like a high school graduation robe. People have seen it on television probably, or if you live in a major U.S. city, you may have seen people who dress observantly. But it's such a great point, Sean, that people aren't talking about. What you just said is that it has been an incredibly repressive regime as it relates to women's rights for many years. And this new
they're also repressive as it relates to Judaism and Christianity, and gays and lesbians are either flogged or killed. Isn't that true?
Absolutely. But that's, for me, what's so unfortunate about this incident and why I hope it gets corrected very quickly is that we were actually seeing a modernization in Saudi. We were seeing a more liberal approach to women's rights, to women's education, to women driving. And that's why the Crown Prince had built up such goodwill around the world, is because he was taking a different approach. So it really saddens me to see them go so far backwards from what was really an important drive over the past year to change things.
All right, last word, Dan Bongino.
Yeah, Morgan's right. They were trying to diversify the economy, get away from strictly petrodollars. And, I mean, this is an enormous step back, Sean. There's no covering this up. If they have to admit that they did this and the details of this come out and they're as horrific as we think, there's going to be some explaining to do. I just encourage everybody to keep the whole global picture in mind here when doing it. We can't start World War III over this, although there has to be some form of coming clean by the Saudis and some form of retribution. There's no doubt.
It sounds like they want to pass it on to people in the consulate, and I don't believe for a second that they didn't know. At least the Crown Prince didn't know sooner than this. All right, thank you all. Appreciate it. Morgan Ortega and our good friend Dan Bongino.